Welcome back to the fourth episode of our webinar series. Today we'll be discussing scopes 1, 2 and 3 carbon emissions, as well as how they link to direct and indirect emissions. Once again, I'm joined with Rob Bressler, who will be presenting today, who is a PEC associate and also an accredited carbon reporting manager. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. So yes, scopes 1, 2 and 3, what are they and what do they mean? So all of these come under the umbrella of your carbon emissions, your greenhouse gas emissions. But when we talk about scopes, we're talking about things that are kind of directly in your control, your direct emissions, that's scope 1, indirect emissions, which is scope 2, and then we have indirect emissions that aren't in your control, which is scope 3. So this can sound a little bit confusing, but I'm hoping I can kind of put some sense to it. So when you think about scope 1, it's effectively thinking about the emissions that you are directly putting into the atmosphere. So this could be from the burning of fossil fuels in your own company vehicles. So this is the gases that are coming straight out of the exhaust pipe. Or alternatively, this could be the emissions that are coming from burning gas or burning coal or burning biomass that you're effectively putting directly into the atmosphere. So they are your direct scope 1 emissions. Now, scope 2 are your indirect emissions, but they're still within your operational control. And effectively, this just relates to electricity for the majority of people. So as a business, when you're consuming electricity, you are in direct control of turning on those lights, turning on that equipment, turning on that air conditioning unit. However, the emissions from the use of electricity are coming from the electricity provider. So that electricity provider may be burning coal or gas on your behalf, but you're directly in control of using that electricity. Scope 2 emissions also cover things like heat and steam. So if you're using district heating and those kind of things, you're not directly producing that heat or steam, but you may be consuming it. So you're still they're still under your control. But you're not emitting them directly. So when we're looking at short-term targets for reducing carbon and decarbonising, we're normally focusing on these scope 1 and 2. However, scope 3 is also really important. So this is your wider footprint. So these are things that you're indirectly in control of. So when you dispose of your waste contractor, depending on what they do with that, whether that be going for incineration, landfill, recycling, there'll be emissions related to that, whether that be emissions to atmosphere from landfill or out of the pipe from that incinerator. Other things will be the goods and services that you provide. So that could relate to your deliveries, that could relate to your staff commute and the travel plans that they're making, and any items and materials you're purchasing. So there will be an associated carbon footprint to all these things that you're buying and doing, but you're not directly involved in putting those emissions out of a pipe to the atmosphere. So they're your scope 3. And depending on your business, your scope 3 emissions can significantly outweigh your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So this is when it's really important to do your carbon footprint to see what you can do. And generally, when you're doing your carbon footprinting and decarbonising, looking at scope 1 and 2 is generally your quickest way of making improvements. Okay, so this diagram is the one that comes out of the greenhouse gas protocol. So this is like the global standard of how you actually look at carbon footprinting, and it just shows what I showed in the previous slide in a slightly different way. What it shows in this slide are the different greenhouse gases that are there. So like say carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, F gases that all contribute. So scope 1, like I say, this is your emissions that you directly are involved with. So your own vehicles and your own heating and cooling using gas and electric, which are there in this scope 2. Then all of these other indirect sources are either from your upstream, so goods and services that you're procuring, or the goods and services that you're supplying and how that affects your customers and how they're used downstream. So that gives you an overview of scope 1, 2 and 3. Any questions on that, Danny?
Yes, there is. Let me just get them up. So our first question is, as an organisation that is looking to start their sustainability journey, what scopes should they begin to look at first?
Yeah, so I would always look at your scope 1 and 2. It's the easiest thing to do, and the best way to do that is just look at your utility bills. So look at your gas bill, your electricity bill, and your fuel bills if you've got your own vehicles in your own fleet. That's most important. Some people get confused about their commuter and their own personal vehicle and their company vehicle, but when we're looking at scope 1, we're looking at your business owned vehicles. So look at that fuel use, consider what you can do to kind of reduce that down, use alternative fuels. When it comes to electricity, make sure you're onto a green tariff where you can identify your hotspots and reduce those heavy emissions first. As I said before, when you actually do a full carbon footprint, you're looking at all of your scopes. You can go, you can get down a bit of a rabbit hole. There's a lot of data, a lot of things out there. But if you're in a manufacturing business, you're designing a product that uses a lot of electricity by your customers. Can you make that product more efficient? When you're transporting that product, can it be made lighter? Can it be in different packaging? Can it produce less waste? Lots of things to consider on the scope 3. But yeah, the quick bit is scope 1 and 2.
Thank you. And a secondary question is there any further guidance or funding available to reduce these emissions for businesses?
Yes, there is. If you get in contact with PEC, there's a lot of, they can guide you to the right places. But we've got the greenhouse gas protocol. It can be a bit onerous if you're not familiar with it, and there's a lot of jargon in there. But there are tools and more simplified carbon tools out there that PEC can help you with. When it comes to decarbonising, so things like moving to solar PV, putting in heat pumps, these kind of things to reduce your scope 1 and 2 can really help. Or even getting loans for things like EV vehicles and even e-cargo bikes. Lots of different things out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Rob. And please join us for our 5th episode. Thank you.